Hello, today's video will be about this 2020 ThinkBook 15 Gen 2 laptop. It's quite an interesting model, of course not a top of the line, mostly an economy laptop designed for business, students and other users who do not require extensive performance, and it has some interesting features from my perspective. So I thought about making a video about this model. So first of all, in case you are wondering, no, the case is not bent, as you will readily see. It's mostly just the impact of light that creates this illusion. So how can I describe this laptop? It's a 15-inch typical laptop. As you can see, it has the extended keyboard you expect from these models, with a couple of features that are quite advanced and some that are, of course, still lagging behind mainstream or top-of-the-line models. So, first of all, let me show you around the laptop. So, it has the typical assortment of ports. You can see high-speed USB port, the Ethernet port, which starts to get quite rare on more modern laptops, the Kensington lock, the SD card slot, and if you turn the laptop around, you can see the USB and power input port. This is interesting because the laptop doesn't have a dedicated power plug, but on the other hand, it's quite useful because you can use a typical USB adapter in a rush, and you can have some additional operating time. The Thunderbolt port, which I think may also work as an USB port, an HDMI port, and an USB 3 port that is also powered. Your typical jack output that also has microphone input. I think that this is yes, a laptop that shows the state of the laptop, and the power on LED. All right, the power adapter, it's a 65 watt adapter, as you can probably guess from around here. It's quite difficult to bring it closer because the cable is not very long, but I will make a slight attempt at that. Hopefully it will focus. Okay, it focused. It's your typical adapter, nothing much to say. Alright, so let's plug it in the first port as required. And I will also show you the box it came in, because there are some interesting details that can be seen on the box, and I will show it immediately. Alright, it's an Intel processor model. Let's see, focus, good. It has 256 gigabyte storage capacity, and the installed RAM is 8 gigabytes. As far as I can tell, this laptop doesn't have any lower spec RAM, so I don't know exactly why this is mentioned over here, so I think you can readily see most of the details. The weight, 2.6 kilograms, manufactured in China, it's obviously, and date of manufacture 2020 November. Alright, so I don't think we need any more of this box. In case you're wondering, it didn't house anything special, just the laptop, the power adapter, and of course the power cable. In case you are wondering, this power adapter can be used both with a double and a triple pin connector. So one that also supplies the earth connection. Alright, so let's move further and power on the laptop. I think that this laptop also has a fingerprint power on button, but of course I'm not concerned about that and other security features. In case you are wondering, of course it has a trusted platform module chip, so this means that the laptop is entirely Windows 11 compatible. In case of let's say surprises, you may be wondering what kind of operating system is being supplied with it. In general, it can be supplied with Windows 10 Home or Windows 10 Pro or Windows 11 Pro. However, there are sellers that also can supply Windows 10 for education purposes, and this is what we are going to see over here. It depends on where you're going to acquire the laptop. Alright, so let's power it on, and I will continue presenting some aspects as they unfold. As you can see, it has a lit keyboard, which is fine. The keyboard layout is your typical Lenovo fashion. There is nothing special about it. The keyboard's feel, I think, is quite alright. I mean, you cannot have very high expectations. It's still not it's still not a ThinkPad keyboard, but on the other hand, I think it handles quite well most tasks. So let's see. As far as I can tell, it is a bit overblown. Just a moment. Sorry, let's make it a bit less. Okay. Almost there, but still it's a bit overblown, so I will try and see if I can okay, I think this one may be slightly better. All right. So let me present first of all what are the system specifications, because I think this is the first aspect you may be interested in when you are searching for a laptop, especially if you are fond of technology. So it's an 11th generation Intel Core i3, I think, in this situation. It's not. It's a dual core system that, of course, presents 4 logical processors. So as I can see over here, yes, Intel i3 1115 G4. So 1115 G4. This is, let's say, quite a low-end processor. The system could have been provided with an Intel i5 processor with a massively improved performance, of course, massively in terms of processing power for a laptop, not talking about anything stellar. But this model is quite slow by comparison. The performance of the processor, as you can see over here, may not be entirely spectacular. You're talking about 4 logical processors, and particularly the base speed and the turbo speeds are not that great. As you can see, in low use situations, it can go as low as 1.85 gigahertz, and the turbo boost frequency gets to around 4 gigahertz, which is not very spectacular. I think that in general this is not the main issue of the laptop, as I will show you later. Regarding RAM, yes, we have an 8 GB RAM module. I think there are two modules available on the laptop, but we will see exactly what the current configuration is. You have two SSD drives. One of them is clearly an Nvme module from Samsung, 128 gigabytes. And the other one, as far as I can tell, I have to see. I think that it's made by another manufacturer. This CX400 module. I have looked upon before, but I think that we may have to look again onto this module. Okay, so it's a good RAM, 128 gigabytes SSD drive. So we are not talking about an NVMe drive. This laptop is interesting because it houses both an SSD and a SATA drive. It can be equipped with an NVMe module as well as a SATA drive, which of course can be an SSD or a hard drive. And let's move further and see the rest of the specifications. The Wi-Fi module is provided by an Intel Wi-Fi 6 AX201 module. This of course offers Wi-Fi 6 connectivity or 802.11ax performance. It may not be the most the fastest Wi-Fi module, but I still think that it's good. So if you want to have Wi-Fi 6 connectivity, you can clearly be covered with this laptop. I think that the biggest letdown for just about any laptop nowadays, and particularly so for Intel laptops, is the fact that you have the dreaded Ultra HD Intel integrated graphics. And I think this is the biggest letdown of the computer because the Intel graphics is still very slow. I will also show you some benchmarks and present you the reason why I still consider this chip to be lacking in so many ways. It's not understandable or acceptable today. All right. About the rest, the installation is close to the typical one, and I will show you exactly what I mean by that. Of course, there are a lot of programs that have no use in this case, and I will show you exactly one such example. Okay, you have the typical Lenovo software that is being supplied. You have McAfee LifeSafe, which is an antivirus program, and I still think that this is pointless in 2022, and even as far back as the release date of Windows 10, because Windows 10 is already supplied with an antivirus software. Of course, it may not be the best, but still another antivirus program I think is overblown. Of course, we are talking about deals that are made in order to supply laptops with a separate antivirus software solution, and McAfee LifeSafe is clearly one such option. You have the typical assortment of pre-installed Office or Microsoft software, which means Microsoft Office and Microsoft OneDrive and other software that is being released by Microsoft. And of course it's quite annoying, but Microsoft bundles this software with every installation. whether you like it or not. You can see the typical software that is being supplied by drivers, additional user software, the Intel Corporation drivers. Of course, there is something similar for the graphics. Web Advisor by McAfee. I think that this is a pointless program, mostly supplied in order to check how you're using the computer and, of course, have some data on your profile. Alright, so let's see one such application running, and I will present you one of the potential issues with the software. One of the extensions that is being installed over here, and let me see if I can find, yes, is McAfee Web Advisor. Why would you use such an extension? Well, I don't think you have many reasons. It's mostly because it was supplied with the laptop. Otherwise, I don't think you really need such a thing. So, read your browsing history, manage your downloads, communicate with cooperating native applications. I mean, why would you use such an extension? I don't know, but it's clearly pre-installed in with Google Chrome, or if you install Google Chrome later, it will be activated the moment you're going to start using Google Chrome. Of course, from my point of view, it's an extension that I would like to avoid because I see no point in using it seriously. Right, let's move further. I think that the most interesting part will be to see the information about the processor, and of course run some benchmarking applications. I should have also mentioned something about the screen. Oh yes, I think it's still too much brightness over here, so let me see. I think that this is way too low. Let's find the middle ground. Yeah, I think this one may be slightly better. So if you see, yes, I think I should bring it closer so that you can see the specifications better, not me typing on the keyboard. It's an Intel Core i3, as mentioned, a 28 watt CPU built on the 10 nanometer processor technology. It's not a bad processor, but I think that the most serious letdown is the one regarding the graphics chipset. As you can see, it can go quite high, it can get over clearly 4 gigahertz, but this is not important for the moment. Memory, yes, I have mentioned the fact that it has 2 memory modules. Okay, and as you can see, yes, probably it's just populated with 4 gigabytes, and probably the rest of 4 gigabytes are installed on board. Yes, I remember now that this is typical for a laptop of this vintage, because it started to be common for laptop manufacturers to provide just a single user memory module upgradable slot. And even if your software application mentions that you have 2 memory slots, in actuality you have just a single slot that can be user accessed. The rest of the memory is placed on board. So I assume that this configuration could have been slimmed down to only 4 gigabytes of RAM if no memory module was supplied. As far as I could assume, this laptop could have probably a 16 gigabyte memory module that would bring it to around 20 gigabytes of total memory. If it's useful or not to have 20 gigabytes of memory on such a laptop, that is entirely debatable. I think from my perspective, this laptop clearly has enough RAM when running with 8 gigabytes. You can probably have even more possibilities with 16 gigabytes, but the low processor speed and particularly the graphics chipset will temper very much these expectations. Yes, the graphics chipset, as mentioned, I think is the biggest letdown, and I will show you precisely why I'm talking about that. Okay, so first of all, let me show you the performance of the networking module, the Wi-Fi module, because I'm expecting performance to be quite high. Yes, it's high. It's almost 500 megabits per second. We are talking about a Wi-Fi 6 network that is capable of running at such speeds. And I think that the performance is very good. Of course, you have to understand the fact that performance depends a lot on how far you are from the router and also on networking congestion. But overall, I think that this performance is very good and goes on to show that you can have a very good performance. One other thing I would like to mention is the battery capacity. I think it's a 45 watt battery pack. It's the lowest size. There is also another 60 watt hour battery. This one has a rated 6 hours of use performance. I'm expecting performance to be reasonable around 5 hours or more, only if you are going to be very savvy about how you use the laptop. So it's not a high performance. You have to understand that with a similar battery, a laptop that is released in 2022 can have around 8 hours. So the performance has been tremendously improved in terms of, let's say, charging independence. I mean, the amount of time the laptop can be used reliably. So this performance is quite low on most accounts, especially when you consider the fact that it's a laptop that has integrated graphics. But still, the processor is the main culprit in this case. The screen is also to blame partially, but I think that it's not the biggest consumer in this case. What about the LCD? I should have mentioned right from the start that I think the LCD has quite good quality, and I will try and present some of its strong points. First of all, there are still some LCD screens that are having a certain tint towards the blues, and this is particularly due to the fact that they used very cheap LEDs as a backlight. And this is one such reason why some screens have atrocious color reproduction. And this is still typical on some very low-cost laptops or even on tablets. And I think that not having such a situation is a major advantage. More, I think that despite comparisons that are quite difficult to make with OLED screens, this LCD has quite good uniformity. If you look closer, you may notice that part of the LCD may be brighter or darker, and there is still the impact of the LCD screen construction on the brightness near the edges. However, I think that the performance is quite good, especially when we are considering a laptop that for the base model I think that can be had at around $800. So for this price, I don't think it's a bad screen at all. And the screen is the most important part in a laptop, besides, of course, the processor and the graphics chipset. But the screen really creates the set for your expectations and for the way in which you can enjoy the laptop. All right, so let's see something else. I think that I should be running a benchmark. I would like to show you the also some older and some newer benchmarks, because I'm going to show you exactly why even running all the benchmarks can be taxing. I will start with an OpenGL benchmark. Yes, in some ways it's kind of useless, because OpenGL is not used anymore in games, or not used as much as it was before. However, it's still going to show some interesting details. We are not going to use the full HD resolution because it's not required. We're going to see some performance issues even without this. And keep in mind that you are looking at a test that was designed in the early 2000s. So such a laptop should have been able to have spectacular performance, but still, due to the graphics chipset, this is not the case. And I think that in many ways, still supplying these laptops with those poor graphics chipset was and still is one of the biggest mistakes of Intel. Of course, even if performance is very high over here, I'm not going to consider it relevant, because there are some tests where it seriously drops. And this means that it's not going to be fantastic in some circumstances. You shouldn't be bothered by these effects. These are due to running at very high speeds. And of course, having no vertical synchronization, which is typical for these benchmarks. I mean, you could not have seen how fast the processor would go, the graphics would run. But still, you have noticed that there are situations where the frame rate drops from 900 to around 400, and this is actually showing a clear situation of the graphics chipset not being powerful enough. And in another benchmark, you're going to clearly see the fact that even very old tests can still not be run properly. And this is, of course, from my perspective, entirely unacceptable for a laptop, no matter how cheap it is. But this is the situation that Intel has been indulging in for decades, so nothing spectacular. That test was important for older generation graphics chipsets. When that explosion took place, in general, frame rate would drop so low, or it would be so severely affected that it would be a problem. However, with this chipset, clearly it's not the issue. One other thing that may be useful when thinking about these benchmarks, it goes on to show if you can enjoy some slightly older games on such a platform. And there are some users that, since they see the fact that the laptop cannot run modern games, they still try to run some older games. And sometimes knowing the fact that there are no graphics artifacts is a good information in this situation. As far as I can tell, up until this point, graphics compatibility is excellent. I have not seen any graphical glitch, which of course is not a given with with more modern graphics solutions. Of course, this does not tell you much, because it may not be entirely expected for you to run such old graphics applications. But in the instance when you would need such a thing, you would be entirely covered. I noticed over here a small glitch, but I don't think it's as annoying. You still notice the minimum and the maximum frame rate being so far off. And I still think that this goes on to show that there are issues with the graphics performance. And think about it, such a benchmark has been designed in the early 2000s. A laptop released in 2020, I think, shouldn't have had any sort of issue in running the benchmark at full speed. However, as mentioned, Intel has released for decades upon graphics chipsets. AMD wasn't to be absolved from such an issue. However, in general, their chipsets have been performing slightly better than Intel graphics modules. However, there are some instances where compatibility or performance is not particularly stable or consistent. I don't think that this test is going to show any serious issues. However, there are some interesting details, and there is a reason why I am running such obsolete benchmarks compared with, I don't know, the latest version of 3D Mark or any other benchmarking suite. First of all, they show that there are still some issues, and I have been mentioning this extensively, but also the fact that they can center quite well on what are the strong points and the weak points of a particular platform you are testing. Of course, just about any modern test shows that, but one that can be relatable or that has a performance that can be tested with computers that are quite old and those that are slightly newer than such an example, I think that shows a lot of details. The fact that we are still having issues, even if we are talking about high performance graphics, memory, and just about anything. Unfortunately, of course, there is an issue, and not, let's say, too much in the future, too far into the future, we will not see meaningful information, because the frame rate is kept at 999 maximum. So let's see, I think that, okay, it ran into an issue. Probably this was something to be expected. I don't think that if we are going to ignore the test, it's going to show anything. Of course, we don't have the pointer visible. Ignore. Yes, and unfortunately no details. Yes, this wasn't quite what I expected. Okay, we can have those moments when we made the wrong choice, but anyway. So let's run a more meaningful one, and I'm not going to keep you too much waiting, and I'm going to run a relevant modern test, because I think that this one will show you much more likely what you can expect. Sorry, I pressed on the wrong button. Alright, and we are going to run the full suit. Passmark Performance Test 9 is a very good benchmarking suite. The advantage of using such software is the fact that you can have probably thousands systems that can be compared with in terms of processor and graphics performance as well as storage. So I think that this is a very good choice. Okay, we're going to run the full benchmarking suite. I should have closed the task manager, but I let it running. It's not going to affect that much the performance, but you're going to see right away what performance we are expecting. In general, running Task Manager or just about any application that can have some sort of impact on performance is going to reduce probably by a couple of percents, around 1 to 3%, or let's say at most 5% the result in processor tests. In graphics tests, in general, it doesn't have such an impact. I'm expecting something around 4,000 or 6,000. Not very high, not very low. With such a CPU, you can't have too high expectations. But of course, I still think that the graphics performance is the worst. And you're going to see this performance as being unsatisfying, not only in games, but also in applications where the graphics chipset is being used more. So if you are working in graphics editing, or if you are having some other activities, I don't know, like movie editing, then it's going to be seriously lacking. Just as well if you are going to use design or computer-aided design. Those 2D graphics tests do not tax that much the graphics chipset, so performance is probably going to be decent. Of course, they run much faster on even faster graphics chipsets, so this one is no good example. In here you can readily see some the impact of a poor graphics chipset. As you notice, there are moments when the performance drops below 60 frames per second, and think about it, this is still a 60 frames per second LCD screen. I should have mentioned from the start that it's a full HD screen, which is great and it's not a bad one. However, the graphics performance is very poor. Mm, 2000 CPU max, yes, it's even lower than I was expecting. Probably my mistake was thinking about a similarly equipped laptop with an i5 processor. By today's standard, a score that is around 2000 is good only for light office duties. If you have any sort of gaming or serious processing demands, it's not going to cut it. A performance that may be at least 2 times as high can be considered somewhat decent in these tasks. 37, 36 frames per second, yes, a performance that is very low. With high graphics performance, you would have seen over 100 frames per second in such a scenario. And as you can see over here, it dips even lower than 20 frames per second. The good part is that there are no graphics artifacts, which is a good situation. Oh, sorry, 7000 CPU max, yes. So quite a good performance. I have noticed some slight glitches. No, they seem, yes, they are glitches. You can see that when some spaceships are being presented, there are some objects that seem to pop in and out near the edges. So 7000 processor max, that's not bad. I think that it goes on to show a decent CPU performance. However, the graphics performance clearly is going to be much below expectations. I'm thinking less than 3000. There is no compute graphics support, there is no OpenCL. So performance is quite slow. I mean that even if you can run some applications, is not going to be fast enough. Although the performance is over 600 frames per second, think about it. In terms of what you are actually seeing, it's quite low. Yes, 2000 max, not far from what I mentioned. It's not a high performance, but it's a decent enough one for casual gaming. I think that the best performance is going to be noticed when we talk about storage. Since we have an Nvme module and an SSD module, the performance is going to be clearly lower on the SSD module. However, the Nvme module will have quite a good performance, probably in the hundreds of megabytes that can be transferred. Although the RAM performance may not seem very high, I think that it's enough for this processor. One of the potential bottlenecks would be for the graphics chipset, because in general the graphics chipset never has enough RAM performance in order to sustain a good result. You have to still understand the fact that the CPU and the GPU still share the same memory, which means that the memory access is going to have an influence on the overall performance. However, in the case of most graphics chipsets, their performance is already limited due to their own limitations, considering the maximum amount of heat they may release and the power they may absorb. So in general, integrated graphics chipsets are already having some issues. And memory access just compounds certain slowdowns. Alright, so this is the result. I think that the disk mark performance was strong and probably was due to the Nvme module. The lowest performance, as you can readily see over here, is due to the graphics, and I'm pretty sure that this paints a very good situation. The 2D performance is decent, but the 3D graphics performance is the biggest letdown. The processor, as I said, is not particularly fast. A good processor in a laptop would be over 10,000 marks. However, this one is clearly lower than this value, and it's highly visible. On the other hand, the most likely situation you're going to encounter is due to the 3D graphics performance. And of course, unfortunately, you cannot do anything to alleviate this performance. Okay, so I think that you noticed very well those results. I will also save them. Yes, I think I should have pressed, let's see. Yes. One of the issues with most Lenovo laptops, but not only Lenovo, but also other manufacturers, is the fact that the upper row of keys, as you can see over here, is not mapped initially to function keys. It's mapped to these shortcuts that can be used for to increase and decrease the sound volume, the screen's brightness, and do other tasks. I also have to mention that this laptop in particular has the ability of working with a SIM module, so it could be used with a mobile internet solution. You also should mention something about, yes, unfortunately, I think that I should be pressing like this in order to make, yes, a screenshot. Okay. So I pressed Alt plus function plus the key I wanted. This is the situation. Alright, so since I shown to you the second test, and this one was the most relevant one in terms of performance, you have also noticed the 3D performance. I will show you another old test that has been very successful from around 2002, 3D Mark 2001 SE. And I'm expecting this benchmark to show readily some issues in terms of performance. And this is precisely the reason I am running such an old benchmarking suite. You're going to see that even with such a modern laptop, you're still going to notice issues. So 500 something frames per second. I don't think that this is a low performance. This is quite good, but I'm expecting some issues when running in with the high details, the same scene with high details. Because you have to understand that this graphics processor is not powerful enough. Okay, you have seen the top of 2000 frames per second, but the minimum frame rate drops below 60. 53 frames, 46 frames per second, and this is entirely unacceptable. You have to understand that this is a benchmark designed in 2001, and such a program still has issue in attaining a good performance on a 2020 made laptop. It doesn't matter if it's for the educational market, it doesn't matter if it is for let's say an economy business application. it's still the fact that the performance is way too low to be acceptable. And when you are having a relatively fast processor, to have such a graphic solution, I think is unacceptable. But still, this is what we are contending with for many decades. I cannot stress this enough. 200 frames per second, but still I'm expecting it to drop much lower when the action is going to be quite strong. From my experience, the most relevant test for newer games is the previous scene that was with the car chase in high detail, because clearly you're going to show to have issues running modern games even at a decent frame rate, so around 30 to 40 frames per second, which of course is unacceptable considering the low specifications of such a laptop. First of all, the screen is a 60 Hz one, and still you're not going to be able to run decently some games or applications that demand a minimum performance. It's, if you want to have a perspective, it's somewhat similar to the following situation. You have a processor that is quite decent in performance, but a graphics chipset that is more than 10 years behind. So 2 years, lagging 2 years, or let's say 4 years, some processor technology, but the graphics solutions performance is more than 10 years old in terms of performance. So I think that this is the biggest letdown. Of course, I'm expecting some tests to show other issues in terms of performance, because they are going to require particular graphics capabilities. Pixel shaders tests were in some ways demanding in the past, but with current graphics technology, it's clearly not an issue. Also, I haven't seen any graphical glitches up until this moment on this old DirectX 8 test, which shows quite a good performance, particularly if you want to run some older games. You are covered. Unfortunately, I cannot say the same about modern games performance. The field rate test is not going to be relevant. I think that we are over 100 something frames per second, probably in the hundreds of frames per second. 400, 500, it doesn't matter. Because it's a way too simple test for modern graphics cards. This test is going to be somewhat more interesting, but I have to see the actual frame rate mentioned on the benchmarks results. I'm not expecting any serious slowdowns here. No issue here at all. Yes, it's running quite well. $49,000 3D Max. Quite a good result, but you have to first understand the fact that most of the performance comes from running the scenes or the tests in low detail. The high detail results are not having that much impact. However, keep in mind, we have not used the full graphics resolution of the chipset. We have used quite a low resolution and still there were issues. All right. You have used 1024 by 768. So far from the full 1920 by 1080. So 87 frames per second was the average result in car chase high detail. This result is quite bad because as mentioned you have an average result of 87 frames per second, but the lows have dipped below 50 frames per second, which is entirely unacceptable. Quite good results in terms of fill rate. Of course, I wasn't expecting it to be that bad. The low result in single texturing can be attributed to the way in which the graphics chipsets works. Alright, the polygon count doesn't show a bad result, but still it's far from the capabilities of more modern graphics chipset. I think they can be 10 times as fast as this, with probably a power consumption that is only 3 or 4 times as much, so a lot of performance for just a small increase in power consumption. Alright, so I think these are the results. I will also try and capture them for the analysis. You have in general to be quite attentive at how you're going to write down your results and keep track of them, particularly when you're talking about systems that are having different performance. Alright, so not bad results. However, as I have noticed, there are some issues, particularly with car chase in high detail. And think about the fact that this is a very old test. Alright, so I think this mostly concludes. I can also show you a small test in Google Earth, just because it's a 3D application and it relies much on processor and networking performance. So let's see. Okay, the image has been generated quite quickly, I should say, considering the very good network capability we have available. And let's also see quite good performance, not very fast. You can see some slowdowns, but still a good performance. So if you were to use Google Earth for any non-demanding graphics application, even if it's demanding in terms of networking and processing power, you would have quite good results. Alright, so I think this one concludes pretty well the set of tests. What I think about this laptop? Well, clearly it's not a laptop that I would see as being suitable with a price of around $700. I think that the right price for this performance is probably around $400. But I think that these models are still being sold at around $700, which of course is overly expensive for the performance you are getting, especially for the graphics performance. The networking performance is solid, as you have seen from the test. The CPU performance is decent, there's no doubt about that. The laptop's build quality, I think, is very good. There are no complaints about that. The cooling noise is not annoying. There is a single fan, but it has quite good performance, and it's not overly annoying. The screen, I think, is one of the very good choices in this design. And the battery performance, I think, is somewhat average, with the potential of getting obviously even lower in case of strong demands for the laptop, or in cases where you are going to face let's say the prospect of using the laptop for 2 years. So probably I'm expecting the degradation of performance to be quite noticeable in the future. The software bundle is not entirely pleasant, but this is to be expected. Just about any laptop that comes out of the box has some sort of issues and software that is being reinstalled. Of course, Lenovo has been improving in this area, because the amount of software being installed on a typical laptop is of course reduced compared with what happened some years ago, and when there was a large issue with this. The keyboard has quite a good feel. There is not a lot of bending, but still I'm not going to consider this keyboard as being entirely pleasant for a typist or a person that wants to have a lot of comfort when typing and a lot of feedback, but it's not bad. And the overall design of this laptop, I think, is quite good. As mentioned, the only fact I'm having struggles with is the price. I think that $700 is way overblown. Probably $500 would be more decent for a 2020 released model, and probably around $400 would be a very good deal. But this is the current situation. So I think that you have seen what are the main pros and cons of such a laptop. Probably, like I said, around $500 or 400 euros is a good price, but I'm still having a lot of disappointment in terms of graphics. I was expecting a poor performance, but I think it was even more obvious when you take everything into consideration. So overall, I would be recommending such a laptop only at a very low price, and the current price, I think, is way too much for such a poor performance, especially in terms of graphics. The processor, I think, is fine for this platform, but the rest is not much. I think one other saving grace of this laptop is the fact that you can place a lot of storage. So if you have an old SSD drive that you want to reuse from another computer, you can do so. And there are fewer models today that have this capability. And also the fact that it supports fast Nvme storage drives. So you can have probably a laptop that could have around 4 terabytes of storage easily, or 8 terabytes if you have the inclination and the finances to do so, which is not bad. But other than that, it's quite limited. Even if you can upgrade the memory, you are still going to see a lot of issues due to the limitations